That's the amount of money capped at the $30 million that's available to this fund.
President, and thanks for the carrier for doing a good job explaining the bill. Ladies and gentlemen,
and that's the amount of money capped at the $30 million that's available to this fund. Now, most of the bill, Mr. President, is addressed to the governance structure of this fund. And basically what it would be, the decisions would all be made by the North Dakota Industrial Commission. And the Industrial Commission is comprised of the governor, the Attorney General, and our Ag Commissioner. They would make decisions on how the money is spent out of this fund. However, those three members of the Industrial Commission would be advised by an advisory committee. And that committee consists of 12 members. And the 12 members are stakeholders in outdoor heritage, I guess is the best way to describe them. There would be several members from the ag community, several members from the conservation groups, and specifically naming Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, among others. There would be a couple members from the oil and gas industry. And these 12 members would form an advisory body, and they would advise the Industrial Commission on the best way to use this money. The bill also contains restrictions on how the Industrial Commission could spend this money, and you see that in pages 2 and 3. The Commission could not use it to acquire land. They could not use it for lobbying activities or litigation activities. Essentially what it would be to buy up conservation easements, and those easements could not exceed 20 years. So that's the essence of the bill, Mr. President. Your Senate Natural Resources recommends a do pass of this bill. We heard lots of different amendments on the bill, and I have a feeling we're going to hear more, Mr. President, but we ultimately rejected all the amendments and recommend that the bill be passed as is.
Senator Axness.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, and thanks for the carrier for doing a good job explaining the bill. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm standing here today a little torn on House Bill 1278. I strongly support the idea of preserving our landscape, but in this current form, I don't know if I can support this bill. As you'll recall, I introduced Senate Concurrent Resolution 4027 out of the pure passion many of us have for the North Dakota outdoors that we grew up in. And that was voted down rather quickly, 2 legislative days after the introduction. And even though I was disappointed with that outcome, especially after seeing an estimated over 80 hunters and fishermen and women dressed in camouflage and blaze orange, I'm glad that we've at least taken this discussion to a heightened level. Because it's an important discussion to have. What are we going to do, if anything, to preserve the vast outdoors we've grown up in and the landscape that we inherited? I grew up in rural North Dakota, and it's a story that many of us share in this chamber. We began hunting at a very early age, walking sloughs and shelter belts before we could legally carry a gun. During the summers, I would walk the buttes of Benson County looking for deer sheds and other things right along Highway 30. And in fact, during crossover this session, instead of jumping on a plane and flying south to avoid the cold, as I've heard some of us have done, I actually went to the country in North Dakota to take in the serenity and the peace of it all. And I went there to focus and humbly embrace the landscape our grandparents have taken care of and left behind for us to inherit. And our outdoor experience is partly why I've chosen to keep North Dakota as my home. And it's something that I hope my kids can experience when that time comes. And some of you have noticed that some of our members have pins on, and it's a picture of former Governor Art Link. And it's a daily reminder of the task before us that we should never lose sight of what has made North Dakota legendary. And now, perhaps more than any other time, we are faced with the task of balancing our rapid progress and our previous heritage. And Governor Link's words are as true now as they were then. And it's that we don't want to halt progress. But we need to make sure that we let those who follow and repopulate the land be able to say that the land is as good and in some cases better than before. Because when the landscape is quiet again, and the last drop of oil is extracted, will we be proud and willing to take our grandchildren to show them the legendary North Dakota? Or will it be something of the past only to be found in pictures of our photo albums and our state history books? And though we're blessed to have this development occurring in our state and the opportunities it's created, we need to be bold in the face of this rapid change. Another reason I introduced the concurrent resolution 4827 is because this bill has two components I feel are misguided. First is the funding level capped at $30 million a biennium. Personally, I don't feel that this level of funding is adequately going to address the depleting habitat and quality water. And I fear that if we place too little money into this effort now, it will be too late when we finally realize that our opportunity has passed and the landscape and wildlife we cherish are diminished. And the second shortfall, and the one that has had me greatly concerned since I first reviewed this bill, is the governance. 1278 would place the conservation efforts of this state, our outdoor heritage, under the control of the Industrial Commission. And the Industrial Commission is the same governing body who reviewed an application to drill next to a historical and culturally sensitive site in the Killdeer Mountains. After review, they decided to move forward, and that decision was misguided, to say the least, in my opinion. Further actions, the Commission has allowed development to creep next to Little Missouri State Park. These are areas that we cherish, and this Commission is allowing this rapid development to consume some of it. And this is the same governing body that will now be riddled with conflict in whether to preserve our landscape or permit the rapid development to move forward unbalanced. And history shows that consistently it's leaned towards the rapid development and industry. So my question is, when the same body is inclined to advancing industry with little to no limitations or checks, I can't entrust in them the task of conserving our landscape. And because of that concern, I will ask, Mr. President, can we be on the 8th order for the purpose of an amendment?
Without objection, the Senate will be on the 8th order. Senator Axness.
Ladies and gentlemen, each of you should have a copy of the proposed amendment. And Mr. President, I move amendment number 13.0432.04008.
Are there any senators who do not have a copy of the amendment just referenced by Senator Axman? Senator Axman.
Ladies and gentlemen, the amendment to House Bill 1278 would change the governance of this Outdoor Heritage Fund from the Industrial Commission to the Board of University and School Lands. And the Land Board is not a new governing body, and it is made up of the Governor, the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, the Department of Instruction, and the State Treasurer. And what that means is these are all elected officials who are going to be accountable to the people of the state. And that is something that the people lobbying for the passage of this bill in its current form has stated as their main reasoning to sticking with the Industrial Commission, is that they're all elected officials and they're accountable. The difference is the Land Board actually deals with and is knowledgeable about our land. They deal with it for decades upon decades with this exact thing. And its distance from the influence applied to the Industrial Commission. And it seems to me that this is a much more desirable governance and for true and honest conservation efforts. So members of the Senate, I urge the adoption of the amendment to show that the people of the state, that we are serious about preserving our state's legacy and our landscape. And Mr. President, I would request a recorded roll call vote on the amendment.
Would 8 senators please stand if you are in support of Senator Axness's request? Very well. The Senate will proceed by way of recorded roll call vote. Further discussion on the amendment proposed by Senator Axness. Senator Miller.
Mr. President, I just wasn't going to comment on this bill or the amendment, but I rise in opposition to both. But I'll tell you why I'm opposing this amendment. I think there's some kind of problem out there that somehow the agriculture community is against conservation. And that is so far from the truth, it's funny almost. But the Agriculture Commissioner and the Agriculture Commission that department and farmers in general spend a good portion of their day and their time working on conservation matters. Because of what farming does today, there's more wildlife, and the waters are cleaner than they were before. We have no-till operations and conservation tillage operations. We have shelter belts. We have a myriad of things that we do as farmers to try and conserve the topsoil and preserve the land, because that's where we make our money. And removing the agriculture commissioner from this oversight of this board is, quite frankly, a little bit of a slap in the face towards agriculture. The agriculture commissioner is involved daily on matters of conservation. They control our chemicals that we put on our crops. They make sure that our fertilizers are properly used and stored. They do all kinds of things to help better our environment. And that's why I oppose these amendments, and that's why I oppose the bill, because we do so much already, and we're doing more every day. And I think this is just unnecessary.
Senator Hogue.
Well, Mr. President, I wanted to thank the senator from District 16 for bringing this amendment forward. I think it's a genuine effort to make the bill and the fund better. But I have to oppose the amendment as well. We did talk about this down in committee, Mr. President, and for the Senate's benefit, the State Land Board consists of the governor, the Attorney General, the Superintendent of Public Instruction, the State Treasurer, and the Secretary of State. And so that's your land board. And where the bill is now is in the Industrial Commission, which also consists of the governor and the Attorney General. And notice, Mr. President, how we keep the lawyers on all the boards and commissions, and that's not a bad thing. But also the Ag Commissioner. And I have to agree with my friend from District 10. The major stakeholder in this bill and in this legislation is the ag community. And if we were to adopt the amendment from the senator from District 16, what we'd be doing is we'd be putting the state treasurer and the superintendent of public instruction and the secretary of state on and removing the ag commissioner. And I just think that's the wrong approach, because the ag community is a major stakeholder in this legislation, and they need to be a decision maker with respect to how these funds are spent. So I would urge the Senate to reject the amendments.
Senator Triplett.
Mr. President, I'm in favor of the amendments, but I don't disagree with either of the previous speakers that the Agriculture Commissioner is an important factor in lots of processes relating both to production agriculture and to conservation. But my reason for favoring putting this fund into the state land board as opposed to the Industrial Commission is really not so much about who the members are that serve on each board. As we've discussed, there is a fair amount of overlap, but rather just understanding a little bit about how things really happen in the real world. The State Land Board and the State Industrial Commission, in those capacities as boards, those people only meet for a few hours each month. And most of what they do, they rely on recommendations from staff. And the State Land Board has, as the proponent of the amendment has already described, has been in existence since statehood, managing all of our state lands. And so they have on staff many people, biologists and such, who understand grazing and agriculture and conservation issues, because they've been managing all of the state trust lands and other state lands, to the extent they don't include buildings on them, I think, but all of the lands out there that are in grazing or agriculture since statehood. And so when these bodies meet, when the land board meets as a board to discuss what to do with state lands, they rely heavily on the recommendation of their staff. When the Industrial Commission meets as the Industrial Commission to consider issues relating to the Housing Finance Agency or the Bank of North Dakota or the Oil and Gas Division, they also rely in very large measure on recommendations from staff. The Industrial Commission, I believe, meets regularly for about 1/2 day per month, and yet they are responsible for all of those very significant areas of economic development in North Dakota. And simply as a matter of need, they give enormous amounts of responsibility to their staff to bring forward recommendations. And so if we leave this with the Industrial Commission, one of two things would happen. Either it would just become a rubber stamp on the advisory committee, or the Industrial Commission would have to add other staff who would have expertise in the areas now of conservation and land management. And so I think it just makes sense to put this inside the board where the staff is already present and already has decades of experience in managing our state lands. So it has really nothing to do with keeping the agriculture commissioner off it, so much as having staff people available to deal with it.
Senator Bowman.
Yeah, Mr. President, I just wanted to clear one thing that was said about the changing landscape of North Dakota. Yes, it's changing, but it seems to me like everyone in this body is willing to accept that change when it comes to appropriation. But here's the catch. I can take people out to western North Dakota, and we'll sit in a bus, and I'll show you where oil sites have been reclaimed, and I would be willing to wager you'll never be able to find it. We've done that before. People are overwhelmed. If it gets to be a problem, we can correct that problem with proper reclamation laws, so that the next 2 or 3 generations from now, we will have it back to the way it originally was. And I've seen it myself, so I know it can be done.
Senator Unruh.
Mr. President, I would just like to stand to say that I think we should reject these amendments today. And I appreciate and actually share the same concerns as the senator from District 18. Technical expertise is necessary in allocating these funds. It's very important to know exactly how the programs will be implemented and what they will be doing. But I believe that is addressed with the advisory board and the non-voting members that shall be appointed to this advisory board, and you can find that on page 3 in subsection 2. There will be a member of Parks and Rec, Game and Fish, from the State Forestry, and then also from the Soil Conservation District. So I believe that technical expertise is provided in the advisory board.
Further discussion? Hearing none, the question is on the proposed amendment to House Bill 1278. Proceed by way of recorded roll call vote. The Secretary, please open the key. All senators have voted. Any senator wishing to change their vote? Secretary, close the key. Final tally on the proposed amendment is 13 senators voting yea, 32 senators voting nay, 2 senators absent and not voting. The amendment fails. Continuing on the 14th order. 14th order is still on House Bill 1278. Any further discussion? Senator Erbley.
Well, Mr. President, I rise to oppose the bill, but I am for conservation. And a number of years back, I switched from being a cattleman to a grass manager, because I discovered that when I got away at looking at the production of the animal and started looking at the production of the land, I became a whole lot more successful. I've used a lot of conservation programs. Just this past fall, my family and I received the District Soil Conservation Award. A few years back, I was named Range Manager of the Year. So I've breathed conservation it's good for the land, especially where I live in a very fragile environment in the Coteau. I actually stood in this chamber a couple sessions ago as a co-sponsor of a bill that would have allowed perpetual easements for all rangeland for anyone who wanted to enter those contracts, and I would still stand by that because I feel that we shouldn't be destroying any of those properties anymore. But I'm against this bill, not because I'm against conservation, but because of the reason that it's here. And it's here because it's a reactionary bill. The initiated measure that failed last fall is why it's here. We're trying to get out ahead of something that some of us, not us, but, well, some have gotten afraid of. And, you know, you look at the folks that ran that initiated measure, they didn't get enough, you know, people to really run the signatures. They hired people to do that, and then it became fraudulent. So we come up with this bill, and now we're well into the session, and they are a part of the team, they're a part of the group that wants this bill to go forward, and yet midway through they bail on it. So that tells me that no matter what we do here, they're not going to be appeased by it. And so, like I said, I'm against it because of the reason that it's here, not for what it does. Another reason I'm against it is as we look at the oil tax and the oil production, we've all seen the graphs on how the oil wells operate. Our production is really, really high in the first year to 18 months, and it almost looks like a capital letter L. It starts high and it comes to the bottom and then levels off. And so right now, we're operating in that flush part of the drilling where we're seeing the high production, and that will continue a few years, but that's going to level out. And we need to use the cream of the crop, so to speak, to deal with the impacts in the oil areas and throughout the state for infrastructure, so that when it levels off, we then have a solid base to operate from. I sit on the appropriations. I'm in the subcommittee on the human services budget, dealing with talking about a $1 wage increase for our nursing home people, $1 an hour, basic care, DDs, that a dime equals $1 million. We start pulling money away from that, we're affecting our grandparents. I want $900,000 for my senior meals, for the congregate meals. We want to do property tax relief. We're pulling dollars away from that. So I'm willing to let this thing be defeated if an initiated measure comes around. I do feel that the people of this state of North Dakota are smart enough to see that these dollars, if not, won't be available for the very goods and services that they need. And really, one other point I'd like to make, just a couple weeks ago, our junior senator from Washington, D.C. was here. And in her speech to us, she made a comment. She was talking about the Farm Bill and the necessity of doing that. And her quote from that was that we want to make sure or see that conservation won't run over our farmers. In the last Farm Bill, it was really known as a conservation bill. And now in this Farm Bill, she is saying we want to make sure that conservation won't run over our farmers. Well, if we pass this bill, we're not going to run over the farmers, but we will run over our grandparents, we will run over our children, and I would just encourage a no vote on this. Thank you.
Senator Andrist.
Mr. President and members of the Senate, as you all know, I love the West. and I want to share with you how some of the folks out there feel. They feel quite threatened by this bill, and most of them, I think, out there felt threatened by the other failed opportunity. And they're struggling. They're trying to figure out. They're in the arid part, or the dry part of our state, and they've worked so hard on conservation. They used to give awards every year to the best conservation farmers. They've developed conservation farming activities. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Agency has been almost ruthless in buying up water easements. And they wonder why everybody wants to fix their land, because they think they've been really good stewards. When we have visitors come west, like as not, one of their first comments is, "There's no trees out here." And I tell them, that's because God didn't plant very many of them. Go out and see how many the farmers have planted, and it'll seem like a whole lot more to you. We do care about our land. We do love to have visitors come out to our land, but we don't like to have people from afar telling us what we can do with our land. I'm really torn between this bill, and I'm still not sure how I'm going to vote. I know I don't like it, but I'm wondering if it's worth paying the ransom so we can buy off the wildlife interests that want to control our land. I just want you to know that our farmers and ranchers feel they've been good stewards and that they feel this kind of thing is a slap in their face.
Senator Wanzek.
Well, Mr. President, I honestly can say I'm sitting here right now, I'm not even sure I'm going to vote on this yet. I've got real mixed feelings about it. I want to let my urban friends know that I care about conservation, care about wildlife, and I'd like to exhibit that somehow. On the other hand, in line with the previous comments and the senator from Legislative District 10, I feel sometimes people don't quite understand how things have changed on the farm. We heard from the senator from District 33 and how the landscape's changed and how there's reclamation of former drilling sites. I spent the last 40 years participating on a working farm and ranch. Milk cows, did it all. And I look at how things have changed from my personal perspective. We used to moldboard plow everything. Everything was worked black to the point that we had snort storms in the spring, and then we'd summer fallow a third of it, idle a third of it. And we'd get heavy rains and a lot of soil would erode. But through good programs like the Soil Conservation Service and through the concern and actions of farmers, we've dramatically changed that. My brother and I farm over 10,000 acres with my dad and my son and my nephew. And every single acre right now has cover from previous year's crop. There's food, there's shelter. You don't see the dirt blowing in the spring anymore like you used to. You don't see the water eroding the soil like you used to. We just don't seem to get enough credit for it sometimes. And I think it's important that people hear that. And I see it happening not just in our farm, but all around us. The technology has helped us in that sense as well. I understand the concern for our land and our resources and, the public interest in that. But remember, besides the public interest, from my point of view, there's a personal, emotional attachment for me. Why would I want to do anything to hurt that land? I'm the fourth generation. My great-grandfather came from Poland, grandma and grandfather. Didn't even speak English. My grandfather and a number of his sons started their own farms there as well. There's a connection there beyond what anybody else could understand. For me, even my wife doesn't completely understand it. When I drive by the trees or the water dugout or the waterways, grass buffer strips that have been seeded over the years in the trees, I remember hand-picking the weeds out of the trees that we planted. It was a lot of hard, back-breaking work. But anyway, I'm still not certain how I'm going to vote on this. I know that's not helpful, but I want to make sure that all of you understand the lion's share. There's always a bad apple out there. I know there is. That's in any walk of life. But us farmers and ranchers care more about that land than anybody could ever imagine. And we have a true interest in making sure that it's well taken care of and we conserve our resources. I want the 5th generation, the 6th generation of Wanzigs to have the same opportunity that I had. Thank you.
Senator Sinner.
Mr. President, members of the body, I grew up in a farm family, spent all my early years working hard on the farm, and I can tell you that my family's farm goes back to the turn of the century. Same family working the land. I care deeply about the land, and I know my friend, the senator from District 29, wouldn't do anything ever to harm his land. And I know that all the rest of you feel the same way. But I can tell you this about my friends that live in the community that I live in. I heard time and time again how hard it is to find a place to hunt and how much we have to pay to hunt. In the fall of 2011, I made 6 trips west of the Missouri River to hunt. Every time I did that, I had to pay money. That's what really this bill is about, is public access to land. Just getting opportunity so that people who have that heritage, that love to hunt and care about the land, can have access. And that's why I encourage you to support this bill. Thank you.
Senator Unruh.
Mr. President, I stand in support of this bill today. I believe that it has many facets to it, and it can meet many different needs that we have here in our state to preserve our heritage and preserve our lands for our future generation. As the mom of 2 small children and my family roots in farming and ranching, I know that it's very important that we preserve our land for our future generations. And I believe that this is a step in the right direction to achieve that goal. I'm also a supervisor on our local soil conservation district board, and I believe that this bill will allow those successful programs that have been mentioned here on the floor today to continue to thrive and to continue to be utilized by those farmers and ranchers who are already taking care of the land. I believe that this will be an extra tool for them to be able to do so. And I think that those state agencies who have been implementing those programs and creating those programs can continue to do so, can create new programs to allow more opportunities for true conservation on the ground in cooperation with our farmers and ranchers. I believe that's the most important part of this bill, and that it can serve many different needs from many different groups, whether it be hunting groups or farmers or ranchers or conservation. That's why the advisory board is set up the way that it is. There's representation from all walks of life, and I think that with that representation on this board, with this amount of funding, that all of the goals that we have talked about here today can be achieved through this program. So I encourage this body to support this bill today.
Further discussion? Senator Erbley.
Mr. President, I just want to say one other thing as to the previous speaker mentioning our very fine state agencies of the soil conservation districts, the game and fish, and the parks and rec. Those agencies all have budgets that come before us, and I really would encourage them to bring those requests to us here, and we can sure fund them on a case-by-case basis. They already have projects and programs in place. I've used any number of those as well, and we could surely just work with that within the system we currently have. They just bring the requests to the budget for their budget when they come and see us.
Further discussion? Hearing none, the question is on the final passage of House Bill 1278. Would the Secretary please open the key? All senators have voted. Any senator wishing to change their vote? Secretary close the key. Final tally on House Bill 1278 reveals 33 senators voting yea, 12 senators voting nay, 2 senators absent, and not voting. The bill is passed.